giving you the insider takes and the big picture view on the Dogs. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingles, with DawgNation insider Mike Griffith and Cody Chapins.
Hello, DawgNation, and welcome into On the Beat. I'm Kaylee Mansell with Mike Griffith this week. Mike, do you happen to know what today is?
Hump day? No, that's Wednesday.
That would be Wednesday.
No.
We're
that's
close.
Wednesday. No, I don't. It's what, June 15th? So no.
It's June 16th, but
Okay,
today we are 75 days out until Georgia takes on Marshall for the home opener.
Should have known. We're going to do this like in 25-day increments. You know, really with the passion Georgia fans have, we got to do like every day, at least every 5 days.
And it's
right?
going to go by so fast. That's the thing. We're going to blink and it's going to be here. But I wanted to get a feel from, where do you stand headed into the season? Like, what's your mindset going into this year as opposed to the last couple of years where Georgia's really been on top?
Well, I mean, obviously there's been a lot of changes in college football, you know, some that could affect the on-field product. But as far as the team goes, it's as unsettled as it's been in a long time because of all the new faces. And there's not the same type of carryover. Like when I look at projected first-round draft picks next year, I don't see a Georgia guy. When I look at preseason top 100 player rankings, I think there were two Georgia guys, Christian Miller and C.J. Allen, both in the 90s, right? There's nobody to point to and say, yeah, that's the best guy at his position in the country. The quarterback situation, you know, we've gotten used to there being a next up guy. Gunner's that guy, but not a lot of experience, and certainly, you know, not the hype that Carson Beck had before he took over, or even, you know, when they went out and got a 5-star in JT Daniels that they thought would be ready for 2020. So it's a more unsettled feeling in a landscape where there's a lot more parity. So I look at the season and I go, man, Georgia could win another championship. And then I say, well, yeah, but there's 2 or 3 other teams that I look at that could win a championship too. And then beyond that, Kaylee, what type of footing is the SEC on? Because the SEC hasn't won the last 2 national championships. Will there be an SEC champion or even an SEC team playing in the championship game? It's been a minute.
The beautiful thing about everything that you just said, it kind of touches on all of the topics that we're going to talk about here today on the Beat. There's going to be a kind of a theme for this first half of the show, and that's a summer refresh. It's been a while since spring practice started. We've got a couple of weeks until SEC Media Days kicks off, so a summer refresh on where do some of the most important position battles stand. Then we will follow it up with some stuff about the House settlement, which we understand can be confusing, even to someone like me who is around this all the time. We're going to have Mike break it down in simple terms with names and vocab terms you need to know to help you understand better what the House settlement is and how it affects programs like Georgia. And then with SEC Media Days quickly approaching, we're going to talk about 3 SEC coaches who were going to be in the hot seat headed into this year. But first, we'll start with position battles, and we'll just go ahead and get right into it with quarterback, because you bring up Gunner Stockton, and you're someone who has been more skeptical about him and is more intrigued by what Ryan Puglisi has to offer. And I feel like we're kind of at the point where Georgia fans have really started to accept that Gunner Stockton is going to be the starter, even though Kirby Smart has yet to officially name him that. Is there still room for Ryan Puglisi to make that leap? And is this possibly a bigger battle going on than maybe Georgia fans are led to believe it is?
I don't think Ryan Puglisi would still be at Georgia if he didn't think that he could compete for the starting job. So, I mean, at the very least, he's been led to believe that. And based on what we saw, and again, it's an extremely small sample size. The G-Day game is not the end-all, be-all, but there was nothing in the G-Day game that suggested that Gunner Stockton was head and shoulders better than Ryan Puglisi. And we know that Ryan's only had one spring. I mean, the first one he was injured, right? So this is a guy with one spring behind him versus Gunner, who's in his 4th, going through his 4th spring. And so I didn't think there was a lot of separation there. I think Gunner's repetitions are incredibly valuable. The fact that he played the second half and as Georgia beat Texas, and the fact that he played in the Sugar Bowl, even though, you know, maybe not the greatest offensive showing for Georgia, but at least he's got those reps against an elite defense. So there's value to that Ryan simply can't get and won't have going into the fall. And Gunner didn't do anything to lose the job. But I did take note of the fact that Kirby didn't throw the gauntlet down and say, hey, this is our starter. This is our guy. I mean, yeah, he's the guy right now. He's the guy going into the fall. He's the guy who's earned it with his work ethic and, his study habits. He's a film rat. He's a guy that had tremendous success at the high school level. He carries himself well. The team responded well to him against Texas, maybe not as well against Notre Dame. So I kind of look at Ryan Puglisi as having a ceiling that maybe we haven't seen yet. And then the question becomes, how much has Gunnar improved, and has Gunnar's improvement and experience, is that going to outweigh whatever improvement Ryan has made going through a spring and having an entire off season? And so I think that's something to keep an eye on. I think it would not surprise me if we saw both quarterbacks play against Marshall and against Austin Peay, because then it's Tennessee on the road. And things get real pretty fast when you're playing in front of 100,000 at Neyland Stadium. And then, oh, by the way, you've got a week off to figure out what it is. And then you play Alabama at home. And then, you've kind of got one of those pivotal games of the season. I mean, every game's pivotal. You can't afford to lose to anybody. But I guess I feel like Alabama coming into Sanford is a bigger threat than the road game at Tennessee.
See, when it comes to Ryan Puglisi, I think he's been put in an unfortunate situation because the biggest thing he's had to compete with this entire time is time, not having enough time. Like you mentioned, this is only his first spring, technically, because he was injured right when he came in. So my question to you is there still time for Puglisi to earn the starting spot beforehand, or is it going to have to be one of those situations where Gunnar doesn't play well in the first half of the season, and then they give Puglisi the chance?
That's a Kirby Smart question. When I go back and look at my notes and I study all the other quarterback competitions that have happened at Georgia under Kirby Smart, he wants the guy that's going to move the team. That's the bottom line. It's not like, well, this guy has more experience or this guy gives us that and this guy. No, what moves the team? What keeps the first down markers moving forward? And a lot of that's going to have to do with how well Gunnar is able to connect with the new receivers, because it's not like he has a relationship, a lot of game experience with a lot of these receivers that are out there. If you think about it, the guys that he was throwing to are gone for the most part. And there's a lot of new blood in that receiver room. So he's got to get the chemistry down and the timing down with a lot of these players playing receiver and tight end. And his head start there isn't quite as great as it is with his knowledge of the offense. I mean, I think Gunnar's got an incredible knowledge of the offense. I think he's a very disciplined guy as far as his arm strength, as far as his arm talent, as far as his poise under pressure. These are all things that kind of remain to be seen, right? Got it done against Texas, didn't get it done against Notre Dame. But that experience is huge, Kaylee. And, I want to be clear. I think Georgia can win with Gunnar Stockton. But I don't know necessarily if Ryan Puglisi should be counted out, because there was a reason they recruited this guy. And remember, even when Raiola was coming, Puglisi came anyway, thinking that he was going to be going up against a 5-star. So this is a guy that's here to compete. This is a guy that stuck around. He didn't duck into the transfer portal. So this is a guy who sees a light at the end of the tunnel. And I do think that that's going to be a healthy competition. And I do think you're going to see Ryan Puglisi have some opportunities early in the season, whether Gunnar holds the job or not, to kind of show what his abilities are. And if Gunnar wins it, that's fine. But you want Ryan to be ready to go, because we know that quarterback is a position of high attrition, particularly the way Gunnar runs the ball and some of the hits that we've seen him take.
Yeah, for those first two games with Marshall and Austin Peay, they're going to try to give both of those guys as much opportunity as they can, because then you start the gauntlet of an SEC schedule with your first game being at Tennessee. And apart from Charlotte at the end, those might be the only two games where you can get young guys and backup quarterbacks some reps. And I kind of feel similar about the next position group we're going to talk about, which is the edge, where in those first two games, I feel like they're going to try some different scenarios. You have to replace Jalen Walker and Michael Williams, 2 first-round picks. Now, you bring back Gabe Harris, who is the only person in this edge room who's had experience for Georgia, but he was out all spring. Then you bring in Ella Mendoza from Army, but he hasn't had enough time with the team since he was a late portal add. Now, don't forget, UGA brings in 3 edges in the 2025 class, 5-star Isaiah Gibson, Chase Linton, who a lot of people think is slept on, and Darren Ikenabog. But this is going to be one of those things where I think that Georgia's going to have to try out out a bunch of different scenarios in those first two games. And out of all the position groups that we're going to talk about today, this is the one I feel like I have no idea what's going to end up happening for that starting spot.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Gabe's going to be there at that end position that we were just now talking about. The Army transferred. Again, this is a guy that he didn't come to sit, and this is an accomplished guy that has kind of risen up the boards as people have looked a little bit closer at how productive he was at a service academy. I think there's a lot of people with their eyebrows up that believe that this young man can get his way into the starting lineup. You know, the thing I'm going to throw at you today is Chris Cole. And we saw how active he was in the G-Day game. I could see him sliding into that Jalen Walker role. And that says a lot because Jalen Walker was a Swiss Army knife. But I could see Chris Cole being in that mix as well as those players you named. And, you know, certainly Georgia's defensive front is always a priority. I think championships start there. I go back to 2021 and, you know, just timely note, I mean, Stetson Bennett was a backup when the 2021 season started, and good thing he was able to go and had some game experience and reps, right? So you want to get Ryan as ready as possible because you can win at Georgia. You can win a national championship with a backup, which they did in 2021. You can win an SEC championship game with a backup, which they did last season. So even though this has been somewhat of a maligned position for Georgia, compared to maybe some other programs that have had some more high-profile quarterbacks that are playing in the NFL or being drafted in the first round. Remains to be seen if Carson will be a first-round pick. I tend to think that he will. But here nor there, he's gone. He's at Miami, so this is what you have. And then in terms of the defensive line, you're not winning that national championship trophy in 2021 if Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt don't return for their senior years. So when you talk about quarterback and when you talk about the defensive front, these are the two most important areas, I believe, on a championship program.
You know what? I didn't even think about Chris Cole as an option to take over that Jalen Walker role. And we got to see Chris Cole play some really crucial downs last year, specifically on third down. But from what we know about Chris Cole, he's arguably one of the most intelligent people on this team. So if they could take any of the guys in this linebacker group and give them that Jalen Walker mold, it would be Chris Cole.
Yeah, he's an athletic freak. I mean, Smile Munden told us that. You remember, Kaylee, when we covered the combine together in
Yeah.
Indianapolis, and oh, by the way, Smile Munden is a bit of a freak himself. So when one freak is noticing another freak, right? I mean, that just tells you that if Smile Munden is playing, and Smile was very, very complimentary of him, and usually the players know because they're in practice with these guys every day. And they've gone through the reps and they've gone through the drill work. And, you know, when you talk to Georgia players about who's the most athletic guy on the team, Chris Cole's name is the name that just kept coming up again and again and again. And then watching the G-Day game, you know, yeah, you can look at the tackle numbers, and Justin Williams had a great game also. But man, when Cole was hitting people, they were going backwards. And when you see that is a big deal because he's colliding with other elite athletes in the Georgia program. The speed, the athleticism, the power, the technique. You know, you think about the vertical and some of the passes he batted down. I think he's an absolute weapon, and I think he's a guy that people should be talking more about. I think this is a guy that could be a first-team All-SEC pick. If at the end of the year, if they do a top 100 list, you know, just like Jalen Walker wasn't on the top 100 list going into last season, he was by the end of the year. He was a first-round pick. I think Chris Cole is that guy that at the end of the year people can go, wow. And then when he comes back the next year, he's, you know, preseason All-American and all that. So I think Chris Cole is a guy to kind of have circled, to take note of. He's a guy that Georgia has to have on the field.
Yeah, and Chris Cole will come up again here in just a minute when we get to the linebackers, but let's shift to the safeties because as far as we know, KJ Bolden is a lock. It's just a matter of who's going to be on the other side of the field. We're assuming that they're going to use Janelle Aguero in that star role, so he won't be a part of this conversation. Now, Georgia does bring in 3 transfers. Zion Branch, who I think out of the 3 transfers is the most versatile, and I could see them using him also in that star spot as a backup to Janelle. But you also have Adrian Maddox from UAB and Jaden Harris from Miami. But if I'm using my best judgment and looking at what Kirby Smart has done in the past, I think my best judgment would lead me to believe that Corey Thomas is going to take the other safety role, because he started last year's game against Clemson, played in 8 games last season for the Dogs, and he's been in this program. This will be his 4th year now, and we know that Kirby likes to use the guys that have been trained in that Georgia way, and nobody in this room has more experience on this team than Corey Thomas.
Yeah, and he's definitely the incumbent, but there's a reason why they went out and got 3 safeties too, right? There's 2 ways to look at it, right? And you could say depth, but typically guys don't transfer in because the sell is, hey, you can come in here and be a backup and sit for a year. So you wonder about that competition. And all these guys have different stories and different backgrounds, whether it's Zion Branch coming from USC or Adrian Maddox, a guy at UAB that probably has the most amount of experience. And Florida really wanted him. Georgia beat Florida for Adrian Maddox, or Jaden Harris, who, maybe he is a prospect and going to Miami. Maybe, how far along is he though, really? How close is he ready to play? Maybe he has a higher ceiling, but not as ready. When does the light come on? I mean, the good news is, we're talking, and don't forget about Kyron Jones, by the way. I mean, here's another. So we're talking about 5 guys, and that's what makes Georgia special and unique, is the depth of talent that they have. It's just almost like who's going to be the most ready, number one, and then number 2, who's going to stick with the program and want to compete to be next man up, versus who's going to take the easy, quick grab money and go somewhere else where maybe they can get on the field quicker, get an NIL deal quicker, but maybe in the end they don't have the same sort of resume, I guess, if you will, coming out of a Georgia program and being developed by a guy like Kirby Smart, who has put so many players into the NFL. So there's a lot of questions there, but you just look at the raw numbers, and clearly that room is full of talent and possibilities. I mean, you mentioned Jonel Aguero at the Star. Kaylee, he was so doggone impressive. I thought he probably made the biggest jump of anybody that I saw from the regular season into that spring game. I thought he was a dominator in the spring game, and I'm not quite ready to write him off as a potential safety move. He is very talented. He's very good at the Star. But you look at how when Georgia starts to dice it up and chop it up, they're going to do what it takes to get the best 5 guys out there on that back end. And if that means Aguero at safety, I don't think Kirby would hesitate, because remember, another thing that Georgia does and does extremely well is cross-train these players. And not to get off on too much of a tangent, but that's why Tate Ratledge might be starting for the Detroit Lions at center, even though he was a guard at Georgia, right? So that cross-training, it not only adds value to the player at the next level, but it also adds some flexibility for Georgia to get the best players on the field, or to be able to match up optimally depending on what the opponent brings.
And you know what? It may be one of those situations because, like you mentioned, there are so many guys in this room and so many different combinations that they can do with all of these guys. So, it may be one of those things where somebody starts the season but doesn't finish in the starting role, because, as I mentioned, Corey Thomas did start that Clemson game, and clearly that's not the way that things played out. So it might be one of those things that the guy that you first see started that position might not end that way.
Yeah, or you may see it change depending on the matchup. I was talking with Jeff Sentell, earlier today, and he's like, hey, Dalen Everett's the kind of guy that, yeah, he's possibly a first-round talent cornerback, but, you go up against the right matchup or the wrong matchup, depending on how you look at it. Maybe you move Dalen into the Star, because of his coverage ability, so you can get another corner on the field. And I know that's yet another position where we're talking about competition, right?
Well, I think that one's the one that's a little bit of a sensitive subject for Georgia fans, because it's no secret that everyone is rooting for Ellis Robinson. When you have that caliber of a high recruit and you know that he's getting paid, well, of course you want to see him on the field. But just for a minute, everybody take your Disney dog Ellis Robinson goggles off. Let's look back at the bigger picture. You've got Dalen Everett on one side, who, let me just say, I'm like next in line to be the president of the Dalen Everett fan club. Like, I'm very high on what he's going to do this year. But on the other side, you've got a battle that's taking place. You've got Daniel Harris, Ellis Robinson, and DeMello Jones. And what we saw on G-Day, it looks like it's going to be Daniel Harris. And I feel like everybody wants Ellis so bad that you kind of just want to disclude the other 2 that are in the conversation. But Daniel Harris was really impressive to me when I saw him on G-Day. His length, his versatility, even his experience that he got in playing against Notre Dame. I feel really good about what Georgia has in Daniel Harris. And there is depth at that position with Ellis Robinson and DeMello Jones, but I don't want people to count out DeMello Jones just yet. I saw him play at the high school level. You hear a lot of chatter about how competitive he was this spring. I think this is a group that has a lot of depth, but you've got to put the personal feelings aside to realize that Daniel Harris is more than likely going to be the starter when we say them play Marshall.
Yeah, more than likely, and they're all, again, everybody has a story, right? And there's a way that all these young men got themselves in position to be a starter at Georgia or on the verge of being a starter. And I like the Daniel Harris story because this is a guy that came in and Kirby was up front and right out there with it, that this is a guy that needs to learn to practice harder. This is a guy that needs to watch more film. Well, guess what? He did. And now, as you said, all those physical attributes, the reason they signed him to begin with, it's all coming into form. So regardless of the star ranking coming out or what happened when he was a freshman, this is a guy that's found himself and found the proper work ethic, and he's putting the time and work in, and he's earned his job. Nobody's given it to him, just like Ellis will too. In Ellis's case, it was a matter of physical maturity. I mean, he was a little light in the pads, and he wasn't really able to bring it in run support. And we all know that everybody's secondary MOS, and that's a military term for job title, everybody's secondary job in the secondary is to be able to come up and run support and knock the snot out of somebody. And for younger guys and guys that maybe aren't as physically mature or haven't had that year or two in the training room, to be able to get their shoulder pads behind them, you don't want to ruin a guy. You don't want to throw Ellis out there and watch him get racked up by 215, 230-pound running backs that are, lowering the hammer on him. And, now he's got a shoulder or a neck or whatever. You want the guy to fit into his pads, mature at the proper pace. He has gotten bigger and stronger. I will tell you, I did see Ellis Robinson do some things in run support, though, that gave me confidence that he could be ready, Kaylee. But again, remember, this is a matchup game. So there's going to be some teams that are going to go double tight end, and there's going to be some teams that are going to try and go 4 or 5 wide. You're going 4 or 5 wide. Georgia's got the dogs for you, no pun intended. You go double tight end, maybe it looks a little bit different on the back end. So I wouldn't get as caught up into who's starting and who's out there right now, so much as does Georgia have the inventory in the secondary, the depth that it takes, number one, just to get through an SEC season or a 15-game season if we're talking about the playoffs once again. I think Georgia's got all the answers, and how it works out, I kind of look at it like, hey, this isn't Kirby's first rodeo. He's got a plan, and he's got the personnel. He's got enough talent back there that I think Georgia's secondary is going to be one of the best in the country.
Depth is a great problem to have, and you don't notice it until you don't have it. Because remember last year at Kentucky, I think we all remember how much Georgia struggled. Dalen Everett and Julian Humphrey played every single snap of that game. And I'm not pointing to that as the reason that Georgia struggled. Obviously, it was a lot of things, but it's also not something that you can totally discount. So it's a good problem to have when we're having conversations about all the depth that they have in this room. I believe that also applies to the last position that we're going to discuss, and that's the linebackers. And this just shows what Georgia does so well specifically with this position, and that's recruit well at the high school level, because now you've got C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson, who are going into the season with 2 years of experience, both as starters, especially C.J. Allen. And then, you've got 3 5-star backups in Chris Cole, who we know is super versatile. Justin Williams, who maybe we didn't get to see enough of him last year, but Kirby Smart talked about him so much in the spring, and you can just kind of tell by the little things that Kirby says that he definitely favors someone like Justin Williams in the positive manner in which he talks to him or talks about him. And then last, you got another 5-star linebacker in freshman Zayden Walker. So the same conversations that we're having about the cornerbacks in terms of depth is a positive thing. Same thing applies to the linebackers, and that's just what Georgia does so well in terms of recruiting.
Yeah, and not just a positive thing, but a necessary thing. I mean, remember when Jamon Dumas-Johnson suffered the broken forearm? I mean, and there was C.J. Allen ready to go. And so that's where I think Justin Williams is like next man up at either one of those spots, because I think he's a bigger, more athletic version. And Kirby likes those metrics. And obviously he likes what he's seen in practice. And we liked what we saw in the G-Day game. If I'm not mistaken, I think Justin Williams might have led one of those teams in tackles. So, I mean, this is an accomplished linebacker. We could throw Chris Cole in the conversation, even though I think he's more in the Jalen Walker role. He could also be in that linebacker discussion, but there's no doubt you want your inside linebackers, big physical guys, and you want championship depth. This is a physical rough football game that we know there's going to be guys that get injuries. There's going to be attrition. You never know where it's going to happen. And it's hard to have all the bases covered, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it does seem, for whatever reason, Kaylee, at least for Georgia in the last couple seasons, they've had injuries in spades in certain groups. It's not like it's been sprinkled out through the team and, oh yeah, we got a next man up there. It's been like, no, you're down, 4 running backs. You're down 3 defensive linemen. You're down 3 wide receivers. And certain position groups have been hit hard. And I think that's been part of the reason why maybe Georgia hasn't appeared as dominant the last 2 years as they did the 2 years before when they won national titles. And take it one step further and say, well, maybe that's what stopped them from winning a national title. What if, not to go too deep into the quarterback what ifs, but, what if that was the next Stetson Bennett behind Carson Beck? Does he lose to Notre Dame? Right? Or what if, when you lost all those wide receivers, there was a freshman guy like George Pickens who was ready to rise to the top like he did his freshman year? Or what if there was a receiver that had transferred in like Lawrence Cager did to lead Georgia to victory over Florida that year when they were having all the receiver injuries? So I think Georgia's about as well stocked as they can be in this portal era where guys are just transferring out left and right. What was it, 16 transfers out this past year? I think they added 9 and lost 6. That's a lot of attrition. That's a lot of talent going out the door. That's a lot of guys that could have been next man up that chose to go somewhere else. And that's why Kirby always talks about coaching up the bottom of the roster, because now a lot of those guys that would have come in as 3s, all of a sudden they're 2s because the 2s went somewhere else. And so that's why that maturation and that growth and also why Georgia's continuity on the coaching staff is so important, because the left hand's got to know what the right hand's doing. Everybody's got to be on the same page and understand how Kirby wants it coached. He's not going to dumb it down too much. I mean, there's a reason why Georgia is so successful and so good defensively and shuts down so many offenses that otherwise they have great success. And a lot of that has to do with scheme, and a lot of that has to do with the players being well coached. You just don't see a lot of busted assignments from those Georgia defenses.
All right, so that's going to wrap up our summer refresh, all about the position battles that took place this spring. Of course, as we get closer and closer to SEC Media Days, hopefully we'll have some more answers about the things that we talked about. In just a minute, Mike and I are going to have some fun. I'm a little bit nervous. I'm going to let Mike quiz me on some house settlement terms in hopes that both you guys and I can learn some stuff. But first, this is On the Beat presented by Ingles.
It's time to discover the convenience and time savings of contact-free pickup with Ingles Curbside. Just visit shop.ingles-markets.com or download the app. And your Ingles personal shopper gets to work with specialized training on how to select the freshest items for a pre-scheduled pickup. They'll even text you with updates. You pull up to a designated space and your personal shopper delivers your items right to your vehicle. Fresh, fast, and affordable. It's all in the bag. Ingles. Low prices. Love the savings.
All right, and welcome back. Now, Mike, before we get to this quiz, I have to tell you something. I've actually been thinking about you a lot lately, and that's because you have been covering this house settlement since the start of it, and it took a lot longer than everyone expected, and now you finally have the answers and the clarity that you're looking for. Like, do you just feel like a weight has been lifted off your shoulders knowing that this has all been settled?
Well, I feel like I've learned a second language, and that's, that's what's going to be hard, is because a lot of these terms are things that are going to pop up and you're going to, wait a minute, what's that? I didn't know about, like NIL Go just came out of nowhere, right? Like, well, NIL Go where? I'll tell you where to go. No, don't say that. But to, and my thought is, a lot of fans going back to the stadium, people are going to different levels of different conversations. Obviously, Georgia fans extremely well informed, especially those that, that watch our channel and watch our shows and pay attention to the content that Connor Riley, myself, Jeff, you, Brandon put out every day. But not everybody follows it that closely, right? But then when football season comes, they want to have the conversation. They want to know what's going on. So I thought, you know what? Let's have a little bit of fun today. Let me check Kaylee out here and see exactly where she's at with her knowledge of the settlement and maybe some of the terms and some of the people, because these are people and terms that we're going to hear about again and again and again as this new college sports model plays out. So Kaylee, that on June 6th, I know because I was getting ready to cash out at a restaurant at about 9:30 at night, the judge in California, Judge Claudia Wilkin, and hopefully we don't have to ever say her name again.
Yeah.
Not because she's not a nice lady, but she made us wait a month for the settlement. I don't know what you needed to see, Claudia, but you saw it. We finally got it done on June 6th. and it got what the Friday night dump, and it's like everybody's scrambling, like, oh my gosh, get your stories up. And of course, we had our story up on the settlement, what it meant for Georgia. And so here we are now with these new terms for college sports. And I'll start out. I'm going to throw this out there, Kaylee.
Okay.
How much? This is your first question on your summertime quiz. How much did the players, the student athletes who competed from 2016 through 2024, what was the collective amount of back pay that they got out of this settlement?
Was it 2.6 billion?
It was 2.8 billion.
Close. I know it wasn't perfect, but we're in the ballpark.
I'm sorry, Kaylee. That is a red check. You either get it. This is not a maybe I should have done it multiple choice. I didn't.
No. I don't do multiple choice.
2.8. Okay, we won't go multiple choice.
That's fine.
Now, here's the name for you. All right, here's the question.
Okay.
We know that they've started this new entity to oversee all of college sports. It's not going to be the NCAA. The Power Four commissioners put this entity in charge. The three letters are CSC. That's how we're going to know it. CSC. What does CSC stand for?
It's either College Sports Communication or College Sports Commissioner, and I believe I know who the guy is and like what he did before this.
Well, now that's not the question.
Oh.
Were you this kind of student? You were hard to deal with.
I was actually a great student.
Well, okay. Well, you're answering a question.
You told me not to cheat, and I didn't.
All right. College Sports Commission. So you were close.
Okay.
I'll give you a right answer on that.
Okay.
It is the College Sports Commission, and they're still putting it together. And the person in charge is Brian Seeley. And you told me that you know what he did before he got this job. So
he was vice president of legal for Major League Baseball. They wanted to bring in someone that didn't have ties to college football.
Well, that's true. And they also wanted to bring in somebody who had experience working in leagues where there's money and finances and competitive entities that you're trying to get on the same page. But now here's one for extra credit. What did Brian Seeley do before his 8-year stint as the Major League Baseball vice president of legal and operations?
Oh my gosh, I knew this was in your article. Oh my goodness, he was in baseball. Oh, he worked in government. Was he an attorney of some sort?
He was the assistant U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. There you go, as a prosecutor.
Woo-hoo.
So this is a guy that knows his way around the courtroom, and that's good because we're expecting there to be some litigation, right? When the settlement came out, some people said, well, I don't know if this is going to pass the sniff test. You know, there's going to be a couple of challenges in a couple of areas. And I'm going to ask you about those areas right now. And I'm going to start out with the easy one.
Oof.
Title IX. What is Title IX?
Isn't Title IX, it has to do with like equality in men's and women's sports? That
is correct. And the question is, how are we going to apply Title IX? Now, we know that there's a lot of women's sports to equal men's sports, but when we get into this $20.5 million getting diced up, is it going to have to be equal pay for women? That's a question. Now, I don't think so based on the judge's ruling, because when she cut that $2.8 billion up, they did that with a model. They said 75% for football, 15% for men's basketball, and 5% for women's basketball. Now, if I was a Title IX person, I'd go, well, now, wait a minute, that's not equal. Well, now you've got a federal judge now in California that is signed off on that. So there is a precedent for the money perhaps not having to be as equal. The opportunities, however, and I ran this by Josh Brooks, and he said, Mike, this is about opportunity. And we're going to make sure at Georgia that these opportunities are going to be even. Now, that will get tested in a courtroom. The new model will get tested. So that's the first thing. The other thing that's going to get tested has to do with the NIL dollars. Now, I'm not talking about the $20.5 million that all the schools have to give out to their athletes. I'm talking about the third-party deals, the deals they make that aren't related to the university, because there's a system in place for this. Remember, they've got to be approved by the College Sports Commission and some other entities I'm going to quiz you on. And there's people saying, hey, they're going to get challenged with antitrust challenges here. In other words, they can't limit the market or have a monopoly or do any price fixing. So that will definitely go to court at some point to see if that passes the sniff test. Now, let's go back to College Sports Commission.
Okay.
They've got this new system in place that the athletes are going to use to apply for their third-party deals worth over $600 or more. What is the name of that online platform that the student athletes need to submit their NIL deals to for approval.
That's what you were talking about earlier. It's the NIL go.
It's NIL go, right?
Yes.
I just think of the Monopoly board, right? Do not pass go. If the deal doesn't make it, it doesn't go past go, it doesn't get through NIL go.
Mm-hmm.
You might say, well, what in the heck is NIL go? Well, NIL go is the structure and the online platform that athletes have to put their deals in for, and they're going to get some assistance because NIL go, in CSC, you're going to have some athletic directors in there and some other leadership types that Seeley's going to pick for this College Sports Commission, but they're going to rely on some help from a global entity, a well-known global entity that has done a lot of third-party arbitrator work for many firms and many businesses. If you've been to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution building downtown, Kaylee, there's a sign for this global entity because they're everywhere. Do you know the name of this global third-party entity that's going to help establish fair market value for these student athletes?
I'm going to say that no, I don't know the answer to this because I'm thinking about the building across the street and all I can see in my mind is the big sign that says Visa, and I don't think that it's Visa.
That is definitely not,
Yeah.
no.
I was like, that seems like a conflict of interest.
The answer is Deloitte. The answer is Deloitte. Deloitte is the name of this agency that's going to help the CSC and the NIL Go program establish the third-party value. So I think that's a pretty good rundown. I guess I'll ask you this. I'll give you one more opportunity here. When I talk about the playoff automatic qualifier model, right?
Yes.
I want you to give me your understanding of the automatic qualifier model and tell me the conference that's pushing it the hardest.
It's 5 automatic, 11 at large, or like 11.
Let me stop you. Don't want to get you confused.
Okay.
That's the 5-11 model.
Yeah.
Okay, the AQ model.
The Big Ten is pushing for 4 automatic bids. I've seen it everywhere. Everybody's speaking upon it. So I believe it's the Big Ten and the SEC who want the 4 automatic guaranteed, as well as I guess all the Power 4 can't push for it because then they make up everything. But I know it's the Big Ten that's going after it hard.
They went after it hard, and it looked like the SEC was going to be on board when we, if you've been paying attention till May, then that's what you're supposed to think. But at those spring meetings, a lot of these coaches pushed back and said, "Oh, wait a minute. We're just going to agree to 4? We're the SEC. We could have 5 or 6 out of 16. So backing it up on the automatic qualifier model, and this is pushed by the Big Ten, you would have 4 teams from the Big Ten, 4 teams from the SEC, 2 from the Big 12, 2 from the ACC, the highest ranked group of 5 finisher, and then 3 at larges. Okay, and that's the AQ model. Now that model would open it up for there to be playing games. Could you go, okay, well, you got 4 teams for the conference. How are you going to pick them? Well, you got your conference championship game, but that's only 2 teams. They're saying, well, what if you had some playoffs? What if you had your conference championship game and then maybe 3 plays 6 and 4 plays 5s, and then you get more inventory of games and people are like, yeah. Well, that's great, except you're beating the snot out of each other once again. And if you're the 3rd place SEC team that loses your playing game and you get left out, you go, well, now wait a minute. How could we finish in 3rd place in the SEC and not be one? So that's why the SEC looked at it and said, no. And on top of it, the Big 12 and the ACC made a little noise like, well, wait a minute. You're saying we can only have 2. What if we want more than that? Greg Sankey, this may not be in the best interest of college football. So the SEC says, oh, okay. You want to play it that way? And that's where we get to the 5-11 model, Kaylee, that you were explaining, where you take the top finishing team out of the 4 power conferences and then the highest automatic qualifier, and then you just go straight 11 at large bids. Right. And then we're really relying on that college football playoff committee rankings.
Look, I got to say thank you for this because there is no one I know that is more informed about house settlement stuff than you. And as someone who was a political science major for 2 years, you would think that I would have this on lock. But it's one of those things that I talk to you about. The more I know, the more I get confused. So this was really helpful for me and for all of you that are hopefully going to try to explain this to your friends in the college football world. Hopefully some of these names and terms that Mike gave us today can give everyone a better understanding of what exactly is the house settlement and why it's important. Next, we're going to do our SEC coaches in the hot seat. I imagine we're going to see eye to eye on some of these things, but want to remind you that, yes, On the Beat takes place on Monday nights, but we also have so many other great shows here at DawgNation, including the world-famous DawgNation Daily that takes place every single day on video or in podcast format. 10 a.m. right here in the studio with Brandon Adams. And then if you want to catch up with all things Georgia recruiting and know about all the players before they get to Georgia, you can do that with our Wednesday night show, which is myself and our DawgNation recruiting insider, Jeff Santel. That's going to take place Wednesday at 7 o'clock. So love the show that we've got going on here, but also we've got more Georgia content delivered to you almost every single day of the week. Mike, SEC Media Day is quickly approaching. I'm really excited that it's going to be here in Atlanta. I think Atlanta's a great host city, but it's kind of that point where we start to realize, like, who are some of those coaches that are going to get grilled a little bit harder about the positions of their program. So I've got 3 coaches. I'll go ahead and kick us off with the first one. I feel like we're probably on the same page here. There is no one who is a bigger cheerleader of Sam Pittman than myself, but when your athletic director has to confirm 2 years in a row that, yes, he is still our coach, you know it's always a little bit rocky. And Sam Pittman has made this program better than he found it, but the problem is I'm not sure how much further he can take the Razorbacks. Has he reached his ceiling? I'm not sure, but I don't think that Sam Pittman can make Arkansas into a true SEC college football playoff contender.
Well, I wonder if it's a case of champagne taste on a beer budget. Does Arkansas have the money to be able to go out there and get the kind of players that they need to win championships? I mean, I think Bobby Petrino was a good hire. I think he gives Arkansas a chance. I also think if we reflect back on Sam's first couple years, he played Georgia. He got dealt a horrible hand when it comes to schedules, but we know how fan bases can be. There's not a lot of patience. People want results. That's not always the most rational approach. I mean, if not Sam, who could have won with the talent that Arkansas had? Now, is there anybody who would be better than going into a living room and convincing boosters to give money or recruits to come play? I don't think so. I think Sam is optimal in those situations. Sometimes, though, when you haven't had success, it takes new blood to get people to reach back in their pockets and get sold on something. Now, I don't know what established coach in a winning program right now is going to leave their program to go to Arkansas. I think you'd be taking a chance with the next hire. I also think you've got to take buyouts. There's a reason why you didn't see any SEC coaches fired last year, and I think it had more to do with the buyout numbers than it did necessarily the program's success. So I don't know where Arkansas sits on all that. Sometimes the decision doesn't get made unless they know they've got a really good candidate in waiting. This is where I'll take one of my famous sidebars here and tell you a story that a lot of people don't know. When Philip Fulmer was fired at Tennessee, he was less than 1 year removed from playing in the SEC championship game. Tennessee had a lot of success, but they hadn't won an SEC title since 1998. Tennessee thought that Bill Cowher, who had retired from the Steelers, was going to be their next head coach. And a lot of Tennessee people debate this with me, but I've got my sources on this, and they're good because no one goes out to hire Lane Kiffin at that point. Lane Kiffin was not their first choice. And a big reason why Lane got that job was Monty Kiffin, his father, who was a renowned defensive coordinator. But I digress. They would not have fired Philip Fulmer midseason if they didn't know that they had a great option lined up in Bill Cowher. His daughter played basketball, and the thought was she was going to come play for Pat Summitt. Well, obviously that went off the rails. And then they had to find another coach, and that's how they ended up with Lane Kiffin. But the point I'm making here is Tennessee doesn't make that move unless they think they've got somebody better waiting. So now if I'm Arkansas and I'm talking about firing Sam Pittman, who do I have in wait that's better, that's a sure thing? And is it worth the buyout money if I don't have a sure thing waiting? So while on the surface, I agree with you, I would also be a little hesitant to put Sam in my 3, and so I didn't. I have a different 3.
Okay, well, if it's not Sam, then give me one.
Mark Stoops.
Yeah.
Mark Stoops in Kentucky. I mean, this ship has sailed. Kentucky is not a football school. They are not going to give Mark Stoops the money that he needs to win at Kentucky. Mark Stoops was halfway out the door with the Texas A&M job last year. It's very clear this marriage is not going to last. They just could not afford the divorce attorney last year. I mean, this is a sad and unfortunate situation to me because I think Mark Stoops is a hell of a coach. And I think he did a very good job taking Kentucky as high as they could get. I mean, there was actually some apprehension one year when Georgia went up there and played Kentucky in the unofficial SEC East showdown. I don't know if you remember that, but Kentucky was playing to win the East, and they were so excited they thought they had a chance. They didn't. And Georgia, and you remember DeAndre Swift said, I don't think so. But the point is, he did a really good job, but he didn't change the culture to the point where Kentucky is going to start throwing money into football and prioritizing it over basketball. And that's just the way it is. And that's a tough pill to swallow. There was a large buyout involved, so Mark Stoops is back another year. I wasn't proud to trumpet this stat, but I might have mentioned it more than once. He was the longest tenured coach in college football as of 2 years ago to have never won a division title. So they lived with Mark Stoops for a long time, realizing the limitations, seeing the progress and the types of players he was recruiting. And oh, by the way, they did play Georgia, the SEC champion, within a point last year, right? So they really, how far, and they did beat Ole Miss, by the way. And yet we're talking about this program like they're not that far off, but I just don't think in this day and age with this model that Kentucky can get over the hump. And I just saw where Mark Stoops lost a very valuable member of his staff to Louisville. To me, that's the writing on the wall. So Mark Stoops, to me, absolutely number one on that list. And that's unfortunate because I do think he's a great football coach.
I also put Mark Stoops on my list, and it's such a shame because I do feel like he built up a lot of credibility for making Kentucky semi-competitive, and he probably could have stuck it out eventually until retirement and left on good terms. But then in turn, he also lost a lot of credibility with the comments that were made about the NIL money. And you know what? He's probably right. Kentucky is willing to spend more money on basketball and not put it into football programs, but the way he went about it, the fan base didn't like it. And that's not the place where you want to be when you basically have a program that hasn't been able to get over that hump. So I also put Stoops in my hot seat.
And then adding insult to injury, one of my favorite moments of last year, just because it was pure theater, was when John Calipari, who basically got run out of Kentucky, went to Arkansas, where he had to restart the whole program, and he goes back into Rupp Arena and beats Kentucky last year. But my moment was
poetic justice.
When they're asking Cal about, they're like, "Oh no, you hired a great coach. You just need to be patient with this guy. This was a fantastic hire for," and he's just dripping. You're just like, oh, he is just loving this moment to tell him how great the new coach is that they just hired, that he just beat with a completely remade team at Arkansas. So that was my fun moment. John Calipari has gone from heel to hero for me.
Yes.
Like he was the guy everybody hated, but he withstood all that, and he got drugged through the mud, and he hadn't done this in so many years at Kentucky. He gets plugged back into Arkansas, and somehow he's a sympathetic figure. I don't know how long that's going to last.
I never in a million years thought I would find myself rooting for him, especially in the tournament. But the storylines and the narratives, it was like you kind of had to, and the poetic justice that came along with it. I love it when a good storyline comes in. So I also did that.
And I want to tell people, if you look at our DawgNation YouTube channel, if you are not subscribed to this channel, you have to subscribe. Trust me. We've got an interview with Cal from SEC spring meetings 2 years ago. And I was just drawn to him like a moth to a flame, like, this isn't really a Georgia story, but I've got to see where Cal's at with this, because you're hearing him say, "Yeah, I went to have a team meeting and nobody showed up, and I realized I didn't have a team," And he's talking about, I wore this is the only Arkansas shirt I got. I got a lot of blue clothes. It was like the Rodney Dangerfield routine or something. He was hilarious. But if you go back and watch that interview with Cal 2 years ago, from 2 years ago spring meeting, or just over a year ago, see where he's at now. It's pretty fascinating to see how he carried himself in there, the stories he was telling about how bad Arkansas had. And then you find out, you realize he had like $10 million in NIL money, right? Yeah, he didn't mention that part during that interview, but those are the kind of things we get in spring meetings, and those are some of the conversations and video that we have available on the YouTube channel, because those stories are always kind of fun to follow. Auxiliary outside Georgia, but Georgia fans kind of like to know what's going on out there. So who's your... Oh, I guess I'm with you.
Give me one more.
We agree with Stoops. I've got Hugh Freeze on there. Everybody's telling me that Auburn's got some money and that they bought out of the portal. I just don't think the Hugh Freeze test can stand another year if he doesn't have some notable success. And what I mean by that is beating Alabama or beating Georgia or finding a way into the playoff. I just think the Auburn standard is too high. This is a proud program that's had great success through thick and thin. And I feel like that Hugh Freeze, even though I think he has done some work on his personality and become a little bit more likable, there's still people that are going to remember how he threw his quarterback under the bus last year. And then there's people that are going to say, whether you like him or not, he's not winning enough. I think Hugh Freeze is absolutely on the hot seat.
It's tough. It's tough. It's tough because he has such a good freshman class coming in this year. Part of me feels like even if it went the way it did last year, maybe Auburn gives him one more year of wiggle room to develop those young guys. So that's why I actually strayed away from Hugh Freeze from my last one.
So you've only had two. So who's your last one? Let's see
My
if we got
last one, this one might come as a surprise, but I think this applies to what you mentioned earlier about a lot of people aren't willing to fire their coach unless they have another coach in line. I'm actually going to go Brent Venables here from Oklahoma, because if you think that Oklahoma is going to sit around and watch Texas have all the success in the SEC and them not even be a middle tier program, then you're wrong. Now, luckily enough for Brent Venables, they were able to use their offensive coordinator as like the mid-season sacrificial lamb. But Oklahoma is a very desirable job. This is a very proud program from the past, and I think a lot of coaches would like to dip their toes in the Oklahoma water. So Brent Venables is someone I think he needs to be really careful about the way this plays out, because Oklahoma is not a program that's just going to sit on the sidelines and watch everybody else have success.
Yeah, I agree 100%. We're in unison on this one. And I like Brent Venables, by the way. I think
Yeah.
he's a fantastic football coach. They have, I believe this is right, Kaylee, I believe they have the most returning production in the SEC. So there's a lot of guys that have played a lot of football there, and they hired Jim Nagy to be their general manager.
Yep.
Now and Jim Nagy, for those who don't recall, and we've had him on the programs quite often, used to be the executive director of the Senior Bowl, and for 19 years he was a scout. He worked with Bill Belichick and won Super Bowls. He won Super Bowls in Green Bay. He was with Pete Carroll in Seattle. I mean, he is a plugged-in NFL mind and talent evaluator, and so he's been hired by Oklahoma. So yes, to that extent, they are throwing the kitchen sink at this, because I'm with you. If Oklahoma doesn't get it done, that's not a program that's going to just be relegated to second or third tier status in the SEC. And they were third tier last year, not even second tier. Outside of beating Alabama, they didn't do anything. So I'm with you. I think Brent Venables, the only place. So to recap, we're on the same page on Brent Venables and Mark Stoops.
Mm-hmm.
You went with Sam. You went after Sam Pittman. You went after him, Kaylee.
I would. That feels very aggressive.
You went after him.
I had to put my heart aside and go with my head, and sometimes that's really hard for me. But I did it, and that's a sign of growth.
And I went after Hugh Freeze. Now, how much these schools are going to go after these guys? Those answers are in the bank accounts of boosters that have the money to pay the buyouts. Because right now, you really have to think about these contracts. And I guess a thought that I'd leave you with, or that I wonder about, and I bring this up because of the Nico, I'm going to leave you situation.
Nico, I'm going to leave you?
I thought it was I'm going to leave you. But, a lot of the fans were upset because I think we're going to see this happen again. I think it's just a matter of time when players sign contracts, because that's where this is going. What happens when the player wants to renegotiate? And that's what happened with Nico. A lot of people, well, he'd already signed a contract and he had all these years on it. I said, yeah, didn't that happen with Rick Barnes? Wasn't your basketball coach signed to a contract for 6 years, but he said he needed a raise or he was going to use, but you had no problem giving the coach a raise who had this monster buyout, who had years remaining on his contract, or else he was going to leave. You said, no, we're going to do that. And Rick Barnes hasn't got you to the Final Four. Nico was in the college football playoff. Nico did stay in the game with a broken helmet, folks. I don't know what I'm having a hard time with this still, because I saw a kid leave it on the field. Now, behind the scenes, I don't know. What I know is this. You better have your quarterback in order in December, especially if we go to this one portal window deal, right? Because you got one shot. And to me, Tennessee should have known, whether you side with Nico, whether you side with Tennessee, they should have known in December who the guy was going to be. Because if it wasn't going to be Nico, go get somebody. Because if you don't get that somebody, Nico's going to take the spring reps. And now all of a sudden he did have leverage. And he said, well, we're not going to go. Okay, well, he's gone. Okay, well, we didn't know. Okay, you don't have anybody who went through spring as your quarterback. You got a brand new transfer now who last played football at Appalachian State. That's what you're left with at Tennessee. And that's an ugly and unfortunate situation for Tennessee fans. I don't wish that on any fan base.
No.
There's much support and firepower. But you're going to see that whole renegotiation thing come up again. And I think, Kaylee, that's why the one cog that's remaining in this new sports model is to get some form of congressional oversight to standardize contracts so that you don't have these messy situations where programs are left hanging, or there's different people negotiating who frankly aren't qualified to negotiate, right? You need to have a standard for these agents. So when you hear about congressional oversight, that's why they want it, to standardize a lot of these dealings and to standardize what's essentially become free agency, otherwise known as the portal.
And I'm like you. I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but my goodness, it was so fun to watch from the outside. I'm glad that we weren't having to deal with it here, but I
Well,
like
for
the
being
drama.
honest, it certainly makes the game at Tennessee seem more winnable for Georgia.
Oh, 100%.
Right? Because you're not going up against a returning starter. And that's not to say that this quarterback transfer from UCLA, who hadn't even, I don't know, a cup of tea there after transferring for Abbey, that's not to say he's not going to be a good player. But if you're any program, you want to have a returning starting quarterback, and instead of someone with some unknowns. I mean, at least Gunnar Stockton has one start under his belt and an entire spring, as well as a half of a football game. Now, he may not have the playing experience that the Appalachian State quarterback that's at Tennessee. He doesn't have those seasons behind him, but he's got time invested with his team in this offense. So to your point, yes, I mean, very unfortunate for Tennessee. Georgia caught a little bit of a break there, in my opinion. And again, I could be wrong. Maybe this quarterback's going to come in and do wonderful things, but Nico was a guy that when Kirby talked about him, scared him a little bit. When I say scared him, I mean he respected him because of the mobility and the arm talent. I just don't think he had the receivers, in my opinion. We'll wait and see. We'll see how this whole thing plays out.
And I mean, at the end of the day, don't forget that the defense that the Georgia quarterbacks has to face every single day in practice, that's as good as prep as it's going to get versus the guy that's now at Tennessee. But all right, that is going to wrap up today's show. It has been such an honor to do this with you. I know you missed Cody, but I just feel so lucky and grateful anytime that I get to do this show with you. So we'll call it a night for here on the Beat. I'm Kaylee Mansell with Mike Griffith, and we'll see you right back here next Monday at 7 o'clock.